All right. So, my apologies for keeping you guys waiting. I was a little occupied. As you know, this discussion is in relation to social issues, which happens to be a very important GS module. Those of you who are aware of uh, the syllabus, UPSC Civil Services syllabus, would know where exactly to find social issues. I just wanted to point out two, three things that in this next maybe 50 odd minutes or so, I just want to draw your attention to some of the things that I think remain very, very critical as far as the preparation is concerned. And more importantly, what is it that I can offer that hopefully perhaps is not offered that often. Is not something scored. It's about, I mean, if you look at the weightage, it's not much. It is not really a rigid paper, unlike economy, ethics, history, polity. It's part of an entire GS1 paper. So it is not really as much as it should have been. So usually every year, if you go through the previous year questions and you see 2013 onwards, 2013, 14 onwards, you will find that roughly about 4 to 5 questions are asked every year. So as it is said, as I was saying, that there isn't really much in terms of weightage. But I want to point out that there is something very important about social issues. And I'm not talking about particularly from the vantage point of GS1, but more importantly, from the vantage point of general orientation vis-a-vis civil services mains examination. And why do I say that? I say that because if you really prepare well for social issues, one thing that happens, definitely happens, is that you end up inculcating a certain, critical imagination that is very important for your UPSC preparation. So as you prepare for social issues, say for instance, you are reading extensively on secularism, you are preparing really well on communalism, you are aware of Indian society, you are aware of globalization related debates, you are aware of poverty and development related debates, urbanization, women's development, etc., empowerment. Then what begins to happen is that you are immediately tuned into something that's that's very significant. So what I am then pointing out is that if you were to prepare for, if you get a proper mentoring done, or if you find a good mentor for your social issues preparation, then it helps you in general articulating yourself better on a range of issues, not just in relation to social issues, but you might be writing an answer in your history exam, in your history module. You might be writing an answer for your economy module. You might be writing an answer for your polity module. But then what will happen is that through your extensive preparation or through your extensive training from within social issues, you will be able to borrow snippets from whatever we have shared, and that will help you improve your answers better elsewhere alongside. So I'm not saying social issues isn't just I'm not saying that social issues is just about that module. My approach to social issues has been very different from the start. When I teach social issues, when I discuss various themes within social issues, one thing that I'm always attending to, or one thing that I'm always particularly emphasizing on, is that we should be thinking about it not just in terms of 40, 50 marks every year, but in terms of, number one, overall orientation, a certain kind of orientation as a would-be bureaucrat, number one. And the other thing is, in addition to this, the essay paper is also majorly informed by social issues preparation, right? So what I genuinely believe in is that if you prepare really well your social issues module, there is no way in which you do not at the same time also attend to your essay paper, right? So your essay paper, as you know very well, essay writing is not really about the language, right? So if you have to write a good essay, knowing English will not really do the trick. Of course, knowing English is important, or if you're writing in Hindi, of course, knowing Hindi is important, or whichever language you're writing your UPSC exam in. But the important aspect is that just by language, we will not be able to do it. If you really want to crack your essay exam, if you want to score well in your essay exam, then you need to also have a certain imagination. You need to have this capability or this ability to be able to draw connections between various aspects, between various things, between various factors. And that will make your essay much more promising as compared to other competitors or your rivals, so to speak. So my starting point is that please do not take social issues as something that is only to do with a particular GS paper, and within that GS paper, a particular module. My submission is that social issues is a very, very important, it's a very critical component in terms of overall UPSC mains preparation. You are able to do very well in your essay if you prepare well for your, if you do your social issues well, you are able to add to your essay in very, very meaningful ways. And in addition to that, you're also able to, as I said earlier, borrow snippets, right? You can actually use a lot of things that we do in social issues in other modules, right? You can do it in relation to environment, you can do it in relation to ecology, you can do it in relation to economy, etc., etc. That's the starting point. Now let's start with how do we go about social issues, and how is it that, I mean, in what ways do I look at social issues teaching? See, my understanding of social issues is a little different. So what I usually do is, or what we as a team try to do when we discuss social issues is so of course there is a lecture, but more importantly, there is discussion. So what we do is we try and figure out what kind of questions have been asked, what kind of themes UPSC has been interested in. So we thoroughly analyze the previous year question patterns. We try and figure out, and on the basis of that, we try to do something along the lines of preparation, right? So we have a set of questions with us, and on the basis of that, we are able to, then figure out how to go about it. So in every class, in every discussion, in every lecture, what we usually do is there is a theme that we discuss. So say, for instance, if you think about social issues, what all is there in social issues? We have Indian society, basic or salient features. We have globalization and its effect on Indian society. We have communalism, we have secularism, we have empowerment, we have regionalism. We have urbanization, we have women's development, women's organization, we have poverty and underdevelopment, and we have population and its dynamics, right? So these are, roughly speaking, the components of the entire social issues module. Now, what we usually do is that in every lecture, we discuss a particular sub-theme. So let's say I'm discussing globalization. So then what we do is we take globalization, we discuss a particular aspect of globalization, let's say the history of globalization, the background of globalization, followed by the dimensions of globalization. How is globalization defined? What are its various dimensions, etc., etc. And once that is done, then we move on to some of the questions that have been asked, right? So what we are always doing is we are discussing, I am lecturing, students are asking questions, we are discussing various themes. And once we are done with all of that, then we try and figure out where exactly do we stand as a batch, as a collective, right? So we take into account previous year questions, or I generally ask few questions, or we come up with sample questions. And then we try and figure out where exactly do we stand. To what extent are we able to respond? Are we able to think? Are we able to imagine? Are we able to come up with our own arguments, etc., etc.? So this is, roughly speaking, how we go about it, right? So there is, and usually what happens is that there's an entire PDF, there's an entire note that is circulated. So usually in the discussions, there is no dictation as such, because students usually get everything in advance or a little later than the lecture. So everything is taken care of. In the class, it is just about we speaking to each other, right? So we discuss various issues to the extent we can. and we make an understanding that is more promising. That's the second part. Now, what is it when, if I have to orient you, if I have to give you an orientation lecture related to social issues, what is it that I can think of? So there are 2-3 things that I want to point out. And these are very, very important considerations. If you're preparing for UPSC, these are things that are very, very important as far as my own experience of teaching, counseling, and mentoring students is concerned. So I've been with students for about 11 years now. And so I've been teaching UPSC aspirants since 2009. And so far the experience have been, and not just formally teaching, but generally interacting with a lot of students off and on, over telephone, over email, and just meeting up, et cetera, et cetera. So on the basis of my experience, these are some of the things that I can, of course, point out. The first thing is that there is no one book on social issues. And this is something that I think all of you must carefully take a note of. As far as social issues is concerned, and I think for other courses as well, for other modules as well, something that mentors, teachers always point out, that please don't go for that one book. Because if you only go for that one book, then the problem with this approach is that, let's say there are 100 odd people, and I say, okay, for this particular thing, you can read this book. Now, if 100 people are reading the same book, let's say by Tata McGraw-Hill or JPH or whatever, then the point that we need to understand is that our answers, our overall engagement becomes very repetitive. It becomes very boring. There's nothing in that engagement, right? So what I am then pointing out is that let us not think about one book. So very often students ask, in most of the discussions, students always ask that, sir, could you please tell us about this one book where we will find all the modules, where we find all the literature, right? We find everything in one book. My answer to that is that even if there is a book, my suggestion is please don't go for that book. And the reason why I want to point this out, the reason why I insist on this has to do with something very simple, right? I'm talking about mains examination. Those of you who have been keeping a track of UPSC would know very well that mains examination is an absolutely different ballgame as compared to prelims. For prelims, the strategy is completely different. For mains, the strategy is completely different. So in mains examination, what is it that UPSC is interested in? What is it that the examiners are looking at? The examiners are looking at your, of course, your writing capability, that within 7.5 minutes, within 8 minutes, within 12 minutes, depending on, the nature of question, to what extent have you been able to get into the crux of the question? To what extent have you been able to, attend to the essentials, right? The fundamental requirements of the question. This is something that UPSC is interested in. Now, if all of us, as I was saying earlier, if all of us are reading the same stuff, let's say I give a notebook, or let's say I give notes, a set of notes, and you just read it, right? You read it, you mug it up, and then let's assume for a moment, although it never happens that way, let's assume for a moment that you exactly get a question that's there in the note. Now, in no time, you will be very happy that you've got a question that you've already prepared for. But there is also a flip side to that, because many students have actually mugged up exactly the same notes. So they are all writing the same stuff without applying mind. And this is where what happens is that you don't get good marks. Usually in mains examination, for a 10-mark question, you usually get about 4.5. Right? That's the average mark. And those of you who've been keeping a track of UPSC would know that in GS, usually 400 is considered as a decent score, right? So out of, 400, out of 1,000, you get 400, that's considered a decent score. But the point is, what if you want to get 5 out of 10? What if you want to get 5.5 out of 10? Or let's say in exceptional circumstances, 6, 6.5, and students have got good marks. The only way in which you can get it is by writing differently, right? And how do you write differently? You can only write differently when you are thinking about something and not just mugging it up. So what I'm proposing is, so usually what I do is, I essentially discuss themes on the basis of various perspectives, right? So I don't necessarily borrow from just one particular aspect that, or one particular text, right? So what I usually do is I read from a variety of sources. So let's say I have to discuss something like unity in diversity. Now, unity in diversity is something that is very simple, right? We've all been brought up with this idea. It's part of our national common sense. As Indians, we know very well what unity in diversity is. But the point is, there are various scholars, there are various people who've written differently on unity in diversity. Various national leaders or nationalist movement leaders wrote about unity in diversity. So what my job is, I have read some stuff by, say, Nehru. I have read something by Gandhi. I have read something, say, by Zakir Hussain. I have read something by S. Radhakrishnan. And what I am doing is I'm actually putting them all together and I'm sharing it with you in the lecture. So your job then is a little easier. So what you are getting is essentially a very concise, a very different kind of introduction to unity and diversity. It's not a usual introduction. So usually people talk about unity and diversity in a very boring way. And if you write about the same stuff, even if that is right, that's not wrong, whatever you will write about. But UPSC will not really give you a good score for that. You won't be able to score much. And we know very well that in UPSC, end of the day, it's about scoring. I mean, in any competitive examination. In UPSC, of course, it's very critical because by 1 mark, your cadre changes. By one single mark, your service changes. By single mark, you don't get a call for interview. By a single mark, you don't make it to the final list. You know very well, right? I don't have to tell you this. You guys are either preparing or some of you might have already written the exam, and you know how it is a very, very important concern, marks. So my point is that let us write. So when we discuss social issues, the idea is not just about covering the syllabus. The syllabus can be covered, right? It can be covered within 24, 25, 30 hours, depending on the nature of the batch. I mean, I can just give few lectures and that will be taken care of. The syllabus actually can be covered within 3 hours as well. That's not a big deal. But the point is, how do we cover? How do we discuss that while discussing, we are also enabling our students to think, right? To be able to think on their own. So if through my lecture, I'm also helping you think about communalism, think about secularism, develop your own language, develop your own ideas, develop your own arguments, then what happens is it becomes a very, very interesting exercise. And then you also begin to feel confident. Because the idea for any competitive, for any competition related preparation is that you should end of the day feel confident. If you don't feel confident, then there is no point, right? So you must be preparing for 18 hours a day or 16 hours a day. But if you do not feel that you have it in you, as a result of which you can crack, as a result of which you can actually leap ahead, you can, go ahead of many thousands of aspirants, then there is no point of preparation, right? So alongside preparation, there has to be this spirit of confidence. And of course, you don't necessarily find this overnight. It is not that today you start preparing and this evening you will be confident. Of course not. I mean, after months of diligent, earnest, hardcore preparation, do you actually begin to feel confident. So the first thing is that there is no single source, right? That's what I insist on. And I always insist on this, that there is no single source for social issues. So what do we do? What's the source? There are multiple sources. So let's say there are a few sources. I don't want to say multiple because that is going to scare you. I know UPSC aspirants do not want to read that much. They would want to keep it as simple and as quick as possible. So let's say there are a few sources. Now, what are these sources? The first source is, of course, your newspaper, right? So in any case, you read the Hindu, you read the Indian Express, or either of the two or both. And once in a while, I think you go through the Financial Express. And that's more than enough, right? So that's one source, because in the Hindu, various editorials, the op-eds, they are essentially dealing with one of the themes that we discuss in social issues. So there is some reflection on development, there is some reflection on poverty, there's some reflection on cities, urban governance, urbanization, etc., etc. So as you're reading the newspaper, you should be able to take stuff out while you're reading, right? And this is something that I always insisted, that if while reading any particular piece, if you're not able to find out what is it that you're reading and how it is related to a particular syllabus topic. So let's say you're reading today's Hindu newspaper, and as you're reading the newspaper, let's say you're reading the op-ed, and as you're reading the op-ed article, while reading, you should be able to figure out that this particular paragraph is actually going to help me for my preparation in social issues, this theme. This particular paragraph is going to help me for my notes for economy, this theme. The moment you are able to do this, so then you should be feeling confident. And as long as you're not able to do that, I don't want to say that there is any issue, but it's just that you need to work harder. So the syllabus has to be part and parcel of your everyday life world. It has to be your mental screen. It should always be there, right? So you're reading the newspaper, that's number one, right? Newspaper is important. The Hindu, Indian Express, the editorials, the op-ed editorial section. In addition to that, the supplement that you have, art and culture supplement, literary supplement, these are very, very important. Some of the articles, some of the cover stories, some of the interviews that are there, they help you a lot, not just for social issues, they also help you greatly for around, what should I say, your history paper, right? Your history paper, your polity exam, etc. So the first thing is your newspapers. The second is your, the second one is to do with your NCERT textbooks. Which NCERT textbook? A sociology textbook of class 11th, 12th that deal with Indian society, right? So there is one sociology textbook that deals with, there is one sociology textbook that deals with sociology in general, the theory, the Western theory. But there is another sociology textbook that deals with Indian society, change and development, introducing Indian society. And that's the textbook that you might want to go through, because this is a textbook that introduces us to the fundamental aspects of Indian society and also, you know, discusses various other features of Indian society. So your newspapers, your NCERT, sociology, class 11th, 12th textbooks that deal with Indian society. Okay. Now the third one. Now I am actually going in terms of importance. So when I'm suggesting the newspapers, number one, what I'm suggesting alongside is that you cannot do away with newspapers. Number two, when I'm suggesting NCERT, what I'm suggesting is that NCERT is a must, and you know this very well. The third thing, in addition to, there is a module, an IGNOU undergraduate module. It's called Society in India. For BA undergraduate, the IGNOU notes, there is a full-fledged booklet, which is called Society in India. And that is very, very important. And IGNOU notes are good fundamentally because they are written by university professors. So they write good stuff. And what is also important is that it's written in a very, very lucid way, right? Its language is easy, it is accessible. You read it and you understand it. There is not much of, there's nothing mind-boggling about any IGNOU stuff, right? It's very easy, accessible, reader-friendly. You read it, you understand it. So that's the IGNOU bit. And what is also, I mean, another thing that is very important about the IGNOU notes or IGNOU literature is that they also have very good examples. And we know very well that if you are given a good example, then you are able to understand things in a much better way, right? So this is the third thing. So we start with newspapers, we move on to NCERT textbook, and then we go on to IGNOU particular module, which is called Society in India, which is there in the undergraduate course structure. Society in India, that's one booklet that we might want to read. In addition to these, so this is just the books. Now, please remember, particularly speaking, I'm not a big fan of Ram Ahuja's very famous work, Society in India. A lot of students keep asking about it. I always tell them that it's of no use. It's a very, very simple and ordinary work. I mean, if you read from Ram Ahuja and if you mug it up and you write your answers from Ram Ahuja, believe me, for a 10-mark question, you will not get more than 3. It does not offer anything. It's a very elementary stuff, and it discusses things in a very childish way. I'm sorry. So I think if in UPSC, if you really want to score well, if you want to go a little ahead of your competitors, your rivals, then what you need to do is you need to read quality stuff. Ram Ahuja is not for UPSC. Ram Ahuja is for people who are writing correspondence BA exams, right? So let's not read Ram Ahuja, either Social Problems of India or Society in India. 2 books that people always recommend. I don't. So I recommend newspaper, I recommend NCERT, and I recommend IGNOU notes. In addition to these, now this is a must. You cannot do away with these. In addition to these, if you want to make your preparation extraordinary, if you really want to nail it, as it were, and crack it, then you can perhaps go a little further and do a little extra. So in English, we always say going an extra mile. Now, this is what going an extra mile would mean in your case. There is a journal, and this journal is called Economic and Political Weekly. It's called EPW. Now, Economic and Political Weekly, as the name suggests, is a weekly academic magazine, right? It's a weekly journal. It's published from Bombay. And if you go online, the latest 4 issues are always free. So they are available online. Now, what you need to do is that every week you should decide a particular day, a particular time. Every week you should make it a habit that you read about it. You go through the table of contents of a particular issue. So let's say this Sunday, let's say the latest EPW was published this Sunday, right? The last Sunday. Now, what we can do is go through the table of contents, see what all is written. And then suddenly you see that there is a piece on globalization and health, or there is a piece on public health infrastructure, or there's a piece on city and labor crisis, right? Or there's a piece on migrant labor crisis. Now, it might be a long piece, it might be a short piece. What we need to do is we need to go through that piece cursorily, right? We don't have to read word by word. If it's a long article, you just skim through it. And as you're reading paragraphs after paragraphs, few things will immediately strike you, right? So you will find something that, oh, this is important. You take a note of that and you move forward. So you're reading, you might be reading a 10-page, 8-page article, but essentially from that 10 or 8-page article, you will find some very, very relevant information. That information becomes a part of your notes because you are always making notes for your civil services preparation. The other important point about reading EPW articles is that very often these articles share exciting, interesting data. So data is also very important for answers. In social issues, this is something that I've been telling students, that if you remember data, you must quote data. Please don't ever quote data if you do not remember it. If you don't remember, don't quote. Because usually when UPSC examiners are evaluating, when they are checking your answer scripts, whenever they find a data, so let's say you've written that according to World Bank 2008 report, these many people were below poverty line. Now let's say I'm the examiner, I'm checking your answer script, and suddenly as I read it, I realize that there's something fishy. So what do? I don't have access to internet. So I write on a piece of paper and I give it to the attendant that could you please go and verify this information. So UPSC examiners are given the option of verifying information. So we need to be very careful. We cannot afford to ruin our chances. But if we remember data, So let's say we remember the unemployment data. We remember the sex ratio data. We remember the urban rural population distribution data. We remember how many people are there in agriculture and how many people are not there in agriculture. If you remember all this, then of course you must quote it whenever needed, whenever required, wherever necessary. But if you do not remember any of this, then please don't use data, because it is only going to go completely against you. Very often students try to be smart. They think that they can fool around, but people who are checking your UPSC, I mean, people who are checking answer scripts in UPSC are actually senior people, right? For the most part, they are very smart, intelligent, and senior learned people. So we cannot really play with our future there, right? We need to be very safe. So in the EPW articles, there is also data that's given. So when you're reading a great article, you actually get extraordinary information. So if you're reading Ram Ahuja and if you're reading stuff on, internet, these are things that you never get to know. These are things that you will only get to know when you're reading stuff from EPW. So EPW is one source of information. The other source of information is another magazine which has extraordinary write-ups. It's called Outlook. Some of you might be aware of it. Outlook has edition in Hindi as well as in English. I don't know if the Hindi edition is continuing, but last I checked, it was in print. But you can always check. I haven't checked off late. Outlook is, again, the issues are available online. What you need to do about Outlook, just again go through the table of contents, and more importantly, the cover story of Outlook, which is the main story, is always in relation to something that is relevant, that is ongoing. So for instance, in the past few weeks, I think many cover stories in Outlook have been around health, have been around access to health, infrastructure, pandemic, public health, governance. And these are very, very important concerns. So again, EPW and Outlook. And why am I suggesting this? Nobody ever is going to suggest to you that for social issues preparation, you can read Outlook and EPW. The reason why I'm suggesting is because remember, in UPSC, you can only get an edge when you read something extra. If all of us are reading the same thing, then we will not be able to go beyond. The idea is to actually go a little ahead of others. Let me elaborate further on this. You see, when in UPSC, how many people write the exam? So many people. It's an incredible number. I mean, roughly about 10 lakh people write the application, fill the application form. Roughly about 5 lakh, 4 lakh people write the prelims. But the question that is important is this: how many people are actually writing the examination? That's the question, right? Just because 10 lakh people have filled the form, or just because 5 lakh people are sitting for the prelims examination, it does not mean that 5 lakh people or 5 lakh candidates are writing the prelims examination. You get it? So 5 lakh people, 5 lakh candidates, aspirants writing prelims doesn't mean 5 lakh aspirants are actually UPSC aspirants. No. You know, only those who end up cracking the prelims, of course, they are serious aspirants. But in addition to those, you have roughly about the same number. So let's say 5 lakh candidates are writing. Let's say roughly about 60 to 70,000 are actually serious about the exam. Now your competition, if you're really serious about UPSC, your competition is not with 10 lakh. That's useless. Your competition is essentially with those 1 lakh, right? Let's not get carried away by the numbers. People who are not serious about the competition, we don't have to compete with them. There is no point. Who should we compete with? We should compete with someone who is serious. And only when you compete with a serious candidate, a serious aspirant, that is when your competition, that is when your preparation is up to the mark. If you're simply thinking about everyone, then your preparation is good for nothing, right? So not everyone who writes the examination is actually an aspirant. I'll give you an example. When I finished my school, I had science. When I finished my school, I wrote the medical entrance examination, right? All India medical entrance examination, All India PMT, back then it was called 2000, the year 2000. It's been 20 years. So I had bio, so I wrote medical examination, right? I wrote All India PMT, I wrote Delhi PMT, and I wrote 2 more exams. So I wrote 4 medical entrance examinations. But to be honest with you, I wasn't serious about any of these. I wrote because people wanted me to write, so I wrote. Now the question is, I was of course a candidate. I was there. So I was also sitting, let's say there's a hall, and I'm also sitting in the hall. So there are 500 candidates sitting in the hall. I'm also there. I have the admit card. I have my photograph. I have the OMR. I have the question paper. I am encircling the dots, the circles that are there. I'm darkening the circles. I'm doing everything that every other person is doing in the hall. But the fact of the matter is that I am not an aspirant, right? I was never an aspirant. So whether I was there in the hall or I was not there in the hall, it didn't matter. So end of the day, we need to ask ourselves this very important question. Are we aspirants? If you are an aspirant, if you really know what it takes to crack the examination, then of course you should know who you are competing with. You are competing with 60,000 to 1 lakh really, really committed individuals. They have everything at stake. They are going to give it their best, and they will not budge. They will not retreat. They will not withdraw. They are going to fight till the end. You know, you are competing with them, right? So in that regard, I was actually recommending something additional, right? So I didn't want to only talk about, NCRT or newspapers. These are things that we do. But in addition to that, if you were to also on a weekly basis go through, EPW, Outlook, your preparation will be extraordinary. So this is the material part. That these are the things that you can, generally go through. Now, in addition to this, there is one thing that is very, very important, which is that you need to be able to, as I was saying in the beginning as well, that it is not about, and I don't think it's just to do with social issues. I think it's to do with history, it's to do with economy, it's to do with polity as well. That it is not just about feeding, right? That will not do. So any teacher or any person, any individual can deliver a lecture, but that lecturing does not really do everything, right? So I can deliver a lecture on something, but end of the day, you will have to, and the lecture of course will be delivered in a way that you begin to think. So you will have to imagine things on your own. You should be able to draw connections. So for instance, a lot of things are happening around us. Whatever is happening around us, we should be able to start thinking as a UPSC aspirant. So UPSC should begin to determine everything around your life. So whether it's the pandemic, whether it's the migrant crisis, whether it's the labor crisis, whether it's the economic crisis, whether it's the unemployment index, whether it's Manrega related stuff, and so on and so forth, everything. So nothing remains just a fact. Everything becomes an issue that you should think about, right? So you should constantly be maintaining notes. You're reading the newspaper, you should constantly be maintaining notes. And these notes are your notes. As I was saying in the beginning, that if in the answer you are able to produce your own imagination, if you are able to produce something that is individual, that is distinctly your own stuff, you are bound to get good marks. This is something that I've said for social issues, and this is something that I always say for sociology optional, that if you are able to do it on your own, right? You write an answer, of course you borrow from various stuff, you borrow from the lecture, you borrow from what you have read, but at the same time, you're also able to add in your own ways, your own imagination. It's almost like in cooking, we use this term we call garnishing, right? So you've done everything, you've cooked an extraordinary meal, an extraordinary dish, sorry. Towards the end, there is something called garnishing. So it could be cottage cheese garnishing, it could be coriander, It could be anything, mint, etc., etc. So garnishing, and garnishing is very important. So your own individual thinking, your own imagination, your own view, your own position, that is something that adds to it, right? Lastly, something that I think is very important about social issues is that, in UPSC, we always have to make sure that we write something that is not, for the most part, that is not anti-government endeavors. If a government is trying to do something, let's say public distribution scheme, let's say Manrega, let's say right to food, let's say education, health, etc., etc., we are not supposed to just criticize it. And as you know, if you really want to be a bureaucrat, if you want to be a public servant, a civil servant, one thing that is very important on your part is that you should be able to see things in a constructive way. You cannot afford to just criticize, right? I mean, criticism is not a problem. You can always tell us what is wrong with Manrega. We can always figure out where exactly the public distribution system is not working the way it should. We can always point out the leakages that are there in PDS, etc., etc. But the important point is that we cannot just keep on criticizing. We cannot afford to only be, in terms of, I mean, of course, it's a problematic word, but let's say negative, right? So a typical aspiring bureaucrat is someone who is aware of the problems, but at the same time is also inclined towards offering possible suggestions, right? So let's say we are aware of what is wrong with cities. We are aware of what is wrong with the labor sector at the moment, but we just don't talk about that. We point out the issues, but at the same time, we also point out what is it that we can possibly do about it, right? This is something that is important. So this is about your overall preparation, right? This is the way in which I think social issues, as I said, social issues is not to be treated as something that is only to do with GS. Of course, technically speaking, it is part of GS Part 1. There are 5 questions approximately every year, and we prepare. There is an entire syllabus, and I shared with you the syllabus, that there are these units, and within these units, there are these subunits, etc., etc. But what we need to remember is that if you prepare for social issues well, if you do really well in your social issues, something that I try to do, then you are also able to work well on your essay. You're able to write your essay well. You are able to borrow from social issues preparation and do something magical, striking, interesting in other walks of GS. And lastly, you are also able to offer very interesting and good answers to questions that are posed in interview, which is the post-mains stage. So for interview preparation as well, if you do your social issues really well, a lot of things are actually taken care of. So what we do in social issues is we make it very, very contemporary, because if you go through the past 7 years questions, you will realize that it has all been very, very contemporary. So we discuss the background, we talk about the history, we talk about the background, we talk about various aspects, but we majorly emphasize on the contemporary aspect of it, the relevant aspect of it, the ongoing aspect of it. And this is the way in which we try and crack social issues. The last thing that is very important, and after that I'll end, is that when we are discussing social issues, one thing that we need to be aware of, and this is something that I always insist, that we should not take it for granted. Because so let's say we are talking about, I'll just give a quick example. Let's say we are talking about a theme, and this theme is Indian society, right? Indian society, or let's say salient features of Indian society, right? Now, the important part is that all of us are Indians, right? We've been living in India for all of our lives. It's been decades. Now, anyone is absolutely justified in thinking that I am an Indian. I know everything about Indian society. So what's the point? Let's say we talk about communalism. So of course, communalism is something that we all know. Globalization, we know it. Poverty, we know it. Unemployment, we know it, etc., etc. But what I keep telling students, aspirants all the time is that familiarity can also be a problem, right? We think that we are familiar. That in itself is a major problem. And I'll give you an example. We live in a house, and while we are living in a house, we are not able to see a lot of things in our family life. Someone else comes, stays with us for a week, 10 days, tells us about something about our family that we never bothered to think about, right? So an outsider comes, informs us, and we are suddenly enlightened. Expand the logic, the scope of the narrative. Let's say a friend from abroad, let's say an American, a French, I don't know, a British fellow, a friend of ours comes to India, roams around, and tells us about Indian society that we never thought about. Although we've been living in India for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, 35 years, but we never thought about that. Why is that? Because we have been taking Indianness or Indian society or our Indian experience for granted. We never bothered. In our everyday life, our family life, we take things for granted. So someone from outside comes, tells us. Similarly, when we go abroad, if we go to the US, we tell them about their society, stuff that they never bothered to think about. And they're suddenly, enlightened. They say, yeah, I mean, we never thought about it. Great. You pointed out something extraordinary. Why? Because they are taking their life for granted. Similarly, when we discuss Indian society, when we're discussing various aspects of Indian society, or when we're discussing anything, communalism, secularism, we need to be aware of this fact that we cannot afford to be under the spell of familiarity. Just because we are familiar about something, with something, it doesn't mean that we need not know. In social issues, what we usually do is we firstly discuss what is it that we know, and then we discuss how what we know might not always be right. So what we get to know is actually a better understanding as compared to what we already know. Right? So this is roughly speaking about social issues. As I said, please don't take social issues as just part of GS, right? Consider social issues as something that majorly informs your overall mains preparation, and not just mains preparation, but your interview preparation as well. It directly informs your essay related preparation. It informs your writing skills. It makes you, the lectures will also help you evolve, make you more articulate, make you independent in terms of thinking. And the literature that I recommended, if you consult that literature alongside going through whatever the notes are provided to you off and on, you should be able to crack it, I suppose. So this is how I look at it. And when I am discussing social issues, these are the things that I always pay attention to. So for me, social issues isn't just about 5 questions every year. Social issues is a very important aspect of clearing your mains examination. So when I am discussing social issues, I'm not just thinking about the module, I'm thinking about the overall capacity building of the participant, the candidate, to be able to crack UPSC mains examination. ये जो questions हैं इनको देखना है इसमें. Are there any questions? I don't know. Can you just tell me if there are any questions? I can see in the chat box it says 2. Recommend some books for sociology optional. Okay. And there is another question. इसमें कुछ और भी होगा, एक सवाल शायद और भी होगा, देखिए. Can I use approximately this? क्या पूछ रहे हैं ये मुझे यार? Which NCERT book have you told? Can you please repeat? So वो बोल भी सकते हैं. हाँ, great. So let them ask the question. So if I may request, you can always ask the question. Can I request? So I request Rohan Sagar. Rohan, yes. Can you ask the question? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, just tell me, can you please tell me the name of the NCERT book which you have already told? I could not write the name. 11th class sociology book which you were telling.
Yeah. So Rohan, class 11th and class 12, there are two parts. One yes, book, sociology book, discusses sociology mainstream theory, right? And the other book discusses Indian society. So you have to get the other book, right? For so.
Okay, sir.
So introducing Indian society is one, if I remember correctly, and change and development in Indian society is the other. So for class 11th, it is introducing Indian society. For class 12, it is change and development. So these are the books that will do.
So right? We just need to, sir, we just need to study the Indian society ones.
Yes, as I said, that NCERT textbook, 11th and 12th, there are two textbooks for 11th sociology. There are two textbooks for 12th sociology. For 11th, check the one that is on Indian society. For 12th, again, check the one that is on Indian society. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Yeah, and then now may I request Galaxy A51. Yeah, so you are on. Or I'll just maybe read out the question. Oh, damn. So this is a question that I need not. Yes, of course, teaching is my passion. So nobody can ask me to do anything that I don't want to do. Outlook magazine is available in market, and how will you read this Outlook magazine? See, what I was recommending was that let's not, I mean, of course, you can buy the hard copy, but why unnecessarily spend money? So what I was recommending was that you can always search online, and it's always easier. You see, an online access is always an easier access. So you can just search online, and given the times we are living in, this is pandemic. I mean, it's a crazy situation that we are all in. So the more you restrict yourself to wherever you are, the better it is. So I would say online access is something that that is better. So Outlook is available. Every issue is there. You just check the table of contents, and from the table of contents, you should be able to figure out what is it that is related to a particular aspect of your GS1 within GS1 social issues, right? Read that. Don't read. I mean, of course, you can read it from cover to cover, line by line, word by word. But what I am recommending is that read it in a way that you are able to figure out what is important for you and what is not so important for you. Because you see, remember, you are preparing for civil services. Time is a very, very important factor. You cannot afford to read every godforsaken thing that's written, right? In a university, you can read whatever you want to read. But when you're preparing for a competition, you need to be very, very intelligent and smart. So you cannot afford to read 10, 12 pages where end of the day, you realize that not everything was of use. So you just skim through it. You just glance through it. And as you're reading, you should be able to figure out something. This is something that will not happen in the beginning. As you keep doing it, hopefully in 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, you will be able to master this, right? That you are able to go through a 4-page article, and within 10 minutes, you are able to figure out what all is important and what all is not so important in that article. This is something, and if you're able to do it, then you have actually done something really, really important for your civil services UPSC preparation. How many questions in mains exam? For social issues, 5 questions on an average, right? So usually you have 5 questions. There is a question on globalization. There is a question on Indian society and culture. There's a question on poverty. Once in a while, there's a question on gender and a question on population. I mean, it varies, but usually you have 5 questions. The Sunday
Hello, good
newspaper,
afternoon.
there's a magazine given by the Hindu, and there are topics like literary review, etc. Are these topics important for note making, or just we go through? No, I mean, of course, you see, as I said, I cannot straight away suggest anything as of now, but what I am recommending is that we will have to figure out. I mean, I don't know what is there in the previous Sunday review, right? So I can't straight away say this, but we will have to scan through. So we'll have to hold the copy, scan through the review, scan through the literary supplement, scan through the arts and society, arts and culture supplement, and see what is there. We might not read everything, but there are 1 or 2 things that will be important, not just for social issues, but as I said earlier, for perhaps art and culture as well, for ecology, for environment, because there are so many interesting interviews on climate change, on the global environmental crisis, etc., etc. So these are things that you can read in any case. But for social issues, if you're aware of the syllabus, then while reading the newspaper, while reading the supplements, you should be able to figure out quickly that this is something that's important for me, and this is something that is not so important for me. Some books for sociology optional, I'll come to this in a bit. How can I put quotes in our essay or GS papers from where? Wait. यार इसका sequence यही है. This is the sequence. मैं कहाँ तक पहुँचा हूँ अभी? Wait, Sunday newspaper done. How to make notes for sociology. I'll come to sociology in a bit. This is social issues. Recommend some books for sociology optional. Wait, how can I put quotes in our essay or GS papers? You see, the point is you don't have to put quotes because it's again a very risky affair. But if you are putting quotes, remember one thing. If you're putting quotes, you need to be very careful. You should be able to provide the source. You cannot just say, according to Gandhi, this. It doesn't work. This is a very, very old school stuff, and it doesn't really work. Once in a while, it actually irritates the examiner. So don't go by something that has been done by millions of aspirants over the decades. Don't do that. If you really want to quote, let's say you have to write a definition, right? I'll give you an example. Let's say you have to write globalization's definition. Now, I can give you 5 definitions that are very easy to remember. Now, when you're writing the definition, there are 2 ways in which you can write the definition. One is you write the definition like this. You say, according to David Harvey, globalization is compression of time and space, right? That's one way. The other way is, and this is much better, the other way is, according to David Harvey, as pointed out or as mentioned in his global economic theory textbook, bracket mein, under bracket, you write the year of publication, 2007, and then you write, globalization is compression of time and space. Now, this becomes a very, very striking way of presenting your ideas. Usually, examiners don't read any of this. Examiners simply read, according to Gandhi, this, according to Nehru, this. If you write, according to Nehru, as he points out in Discovery of India, India is to be treated as a quest, right? Now, this becomes a very, very important piece of information. Rather than just saying, according to Nehru, this, according to... So if you're writing about Gandhi, and if you also add that in Hind Swaraj, Gandhi says this, in Discovery of India, Nehru says this, in Global Political Economy, David Harvey says this, then suddenly your answer becomes, or that piece of information becomes very, very crucial. The examiner will take a note of that immediately, because this is something, remember, this is something that not even 0.1% of UPSC aspirants do. I know UPSC aspirants left, right, and center. They are always doing something, they are always doing things very conventionally. There's nothing extraordinary about them. So if you are able to do these additional things, you are able to add to your chances of making it to the next level, which is the interview, right? How can I put quotes? Globalization and poverty are in economy too. Then how to organize the facts. You see, in economy, globalization is looked at very differently. In economy, there are the technicalities of globalization that we look at. In social issues, we are actually looking at how does globalization affect various aspects of Indian society. For instance, what I do in globalization is I actually list down all the possible aspects of Indian society. Let's say caste, tribe, class, media, religion, culture, language. So what we do is we say globalization and caste. And then we try and figure out what all has happened as a result of globalization to caste. Similarly, globalization and labor, globalization and old age, globalization and youth, globalization and children, etc., etc. This is something that you don't do in economy, right? In economy, you do a very technical stuff, and you also do in relation to globalization, international economic institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, TRIPS agreement, etc., etc., right? Structural adjustment programs. These are the things that you discuss in economy, which is very technical, hardcore. In social issues, we are looking at how does globalization affect various aspects of Indian society. If you look at previous year questions, you will see a question that asks globalization's effect on old age, elderly, globalization's effect on labor. These are things that are not discussed in economy. These are things that we discuss in, and that's what I said, that I will list down all the possible things, that a question from globalization will not be outside your preparation. So whatever the hell is there in India, we will discuss all of that. We will discuss media, cinema, language, tribe, caste, class, I mean, name it. We will discuss it. And what do you have to do? You simply have to write globalization and let's say media. 6 points, done. 6 very, very critical points. That bit is taken care of. Globalization and cinema, 5 to 6 critical points. Globalization and language, 5 to 6 critical points, done. This is how we do it, right? So then the question is absolutely in your hands. Then it is not outside your preparation. This is the way in which we do it. How? Oh, these are questions that I'm not going to answer. I mean, we can be extraordinary in our own ways. There's a reflection of our society. यार इसको ऊपर करोगे? इसको scroll कर दीजिए जरा.
So I have one more question, sir.
Rohan, just wait for a minute. Let me just respond to others, and then you are in queue. Don't worry. Sometimes there's a reflection of our society, religion, and answer writing on secularism questions. What should be the tone? Yes, that's a great question, Shubham. The point that I'm trying to make is that we need to be absolutely objective. As I said, we need to be, I said this earlier as well, that firstly, UPSC does not really pose controversial questions for the most part. UPSC actually always plays very safe. The questions are safe bet. So if you really want to tweak it, you can tweak it. But for the most part, the questions are decent. So you just read and you answer. So you don't really have to take a position that is absolutely anti-state. That's not a good idea, right? I mean, you become a bureaucrat, then you do whatever you want to do for the society, that will happen. But when you're preparing, please prepare as a pro-state individual. You cannot say, I'm preparing for civil services, but I'm anti-state. That's not done. I mean, if you're preparing for civil services, there's a way in which you work. You try to work with the state. You cannot go against the state, right? Bureaucracy is a part of the state. It is not something that is other than the state. So remember, of course, when it comes to questions on secularism, communalism, these are a little critical. So when and this is something that students ask when they're preparing for interview as well, because in interview it becomes even more critical. If they ask you a question, what is the way in which you're going to respond to that, right? Let's say there's already a controversial subject and you are asked a question on that. How do you respond to that? You respond to that as a responsible, sensible, aspiring bureaucrat. Think of it as a responsible, sensible, diligent IAS officer and you should be able to figure it out. So as I said, in your answer writing, this is also what the discussion would be about, that in your answer writing, we also try and make sure that your answers, your responses are objective. Your responses are thoroughly of those who are willing to take the challenge and who are willing to give Indian bureaucracy its due. How to correlate from economic and political weekly? See, you have to just read. You have to go through the articles, and once you go through the articles, you should be able to figure out what is it that is important and what is it that is not so important. It will take time. You will not be able to do it today itself. It will take time. You need to do it regularly, and hopefully in due course, you will be able to gain some mastery over it. Extra reading of novels on societal issues. I mean, novels you can read whenever you want to. It's a lovely thing to do. Reading novels is an excellent idea, but I would say that you should not read it to the extent that your preparation time is compromised. I mean, because if you get bored, because UPSC preparation can also be a little monotonous. So you're reading stuff. And of course, you take a break. You read an exciting novel for an hour, hour and a half. You're traveling. You're in a train, your bus, whatever, you can read there because you don't prepare for UPSC while you're traveling, hopefully. So when you're just traveling, then you can just, read stuff. And it's good. I mean, if you're reading a good novel, it will always help your imagination. But we can always discuss this. I don't think I can, because not every novel is a great novel. There are terrible novels and there are very good novels. So it depends which novel are you reading. If you're reading a third-rate writer, then of course that novel is not going to help us much. If you're reading an extraordinary novelist, a great writer, then of course it is going to help us. If you're reading Naipaul, V.S. Naipaul, if you're reading, I don't know, Gabriel Marquez, if you're reading Vikram Seth, if you're reading, who's this lady, Jhumpa Lahiri, etc., then that's great stuff. And we can always borrow from there. But I think that's a lot of effort. If you don't do it, it's better, because then that is extra effort, is what I think. Not everyone is able to cull out as promisingly as few, right? So that's a separate domain. So let's not get into the novel stuff. Should be done. That we should be clear about but in case I have a rough idea about data, so I can, yes, I mean, if you have a rough, if you just remember that World Bank said this, then you can, I think, see, when you're reflecting on data, there are three things that you must remember. One is whose data. You can't, many people just write, in India, 67% people live in rural areas. That's nonsense. You cannot say that. The idea is you should be able to back this by a credible agency. So your reference should be, according to Census of India, 2011, these many people live in rural areas, these many people live in urban areas. That's wonderful. That is the best that you can do. So number one, source. Number two, year. And number three, name of the report, if there is a name of the report. So UN, for instance, issues various reports. If you remember the name of the report, if you remember the year, and if you remember the name of the organization, that is good enough. You have nailed it. You don't have to cite the page number, etc. These three things will do. Can I write? If I find something important, paragraph in articles, then how I use in my answer, or where I save daily important. See, if you find something important, get the idea. Don't copy it completely. Get the idea, write it. That's it. That's what I'm saying. Get the idea from there. I mean, you can actually copy it as well, but the idea is not to reproduce the whole thing. The idea is to internalize it. You read it, you figure out why is it a very important argument, you turn it into your own language. This is something that I was insisting on. Again, as I said, this will not happen overnight. Please don't burden yourself. Don't think that tonight onwards you will be one heck of an aspirant. No, I mean, it will take some time, and it's absolutely fine. I mean, you can take a bit of time, and you don't necessarily have to become champions overnight. Give yourself some time, be a little patient. And, it's as people say, UPSC is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not a 100-meter race that is done within 9 to 10 seconds. No, it's a marathon. You need to prepare yourself well, and it will be done. Those who have a long-term vision, 2 years, 3 years, they are always able to do it. If you're thinking next year I'm going to be an IS officer, that's a wonderful idea, but that's not really realistic. I mean, if you talk to people who have succeeded, they will tell you that it takes at least 2 to 3 years of extraordinary commitment and unusual hard work, right? Can I write a question daily on the basis of previous? Yes. I mean, you can write one question, you can write two questions, completely up to how you plan your everyday schedule. Write it, but more importantly, get it checked by someone, right? Otherwise, just writing will not do. You should also be able to get feedback from someone. How should we make our answer writing interesting or good, and from where? You see, remember one thing, your answer will not be good if your language is not good. So unless you have a certain command over language, if you're writing in Hindi, you should have the required command on Hindi. You're writing in English, you should have some command on English. If your language is not at least acceptable, your answers will never be good, right? So mains answer writing is also about gaining some element of control over language, right? So, and again, please don't try to do it in haste, right? You don't necessarily do it within a day or two. Language is something that you learn gradually. So if you're reading good stuff, if you're listening to good instructors, if you're discussing with people who have a certain linguistic prowess, you will be able to get it, right? But give yourself some time, and this is how it will be done. Okay, will Indian literature or literature-based novel help? Yes, of course. I mean, literature, I mean, for instance, Dalit writing, if you're reading Premchand, for instance, right? Now, why go that far? If you're reading Premchand, if you've read Premchand's Mandir Masjid, if you've read Premchand's Kafan, for instance, or you've read Premchand's Thakur Ka Kuan, right? These are extraordinary stories. Godan, for instance, right? If you've read it, you will be able to understand what plagues the rural society. How does caste equation work? How does communalism work? What is the disparity between rural India and urban India? What is the plight of an untouchable? For instance, if you read a short story by Krishan Chandra, it's called Kalu Bhangi. It's a short story, right? You read that story and you will be able to understand the problem of untouchability in India. So, I mean, if you're reading good stuff, then of course this is going to, and that does not become a part of that does not become your answer. But you can, in your answer, you know, in 2 lines, you can refer to that. And the examiner will, I'm convinced, the examiner will appreciate that. The examiner will know that here is a candidate who is just not preparing through his syllabus. The candidate is also reading other stuff and is able to draw connections. That is something very important. For sociology optional, very quickly, I mean, you have to read stuff that is there. But generally speaking, there are a lot of books. For research methods, there's a Ram Ahuja book. That book is good by Ram Ahuja. You have George Ritzer's sociological theory that should help you with the theory part. And there is a Haralambous and Holborn, a blue one. It's a very, very heavy, thick book. It's a scary book. That is the book that you might want to consult. It's a scary book, but it's a fascinating book. And again, not the entire book is of use, but if you get things from that book, your answers will be incredible. Your understanding will be much better as compared to many other sociology optional people in UPSC. Right? So, George Ritzer, Haralambous and Holborn, the blue one, NCRT textbooks, of course, newspapers particularly for paper 2. And lastly, IGNOU notes, MA, Sociological Theory and Indian Society. MA notes, not BA. MA notes, because MA notes are better. So MA notes, Sociological Theory, where you have Marx, Weber, Durkheim. In BA as well, you have Marx, Weber, Durkheim, Tucker, Parsons, Herbert Mead, and Merton. But BA notes will not do. MA, Marx, Weber, Durkheim, Parsons, and Merton. And Mead, I don't know if it's there in MA. For MA is, and also the Indian Society one, on tribe, on caste, on rural India, on ethnicity, etc. This will do. I mean, there are people who talk about Nitin Sangwan as well, but I said, I mean, I have always been of the opinion that we should not really go for just one book. I mean, if we are going for just one book, I think there's something wrong with our preparation. We should think about at least few sources, bring them together, and make your own answer. So if you have to write a note on Marx, Karl Marx's Alienation, read on alienation from 4 different sources, develop an understanding, bring all of that together, make your own 500-word note on alienation. That is the best way to do it. If you do it that way, it will take about 10 months to finish your optional, but you will have a wonderful chance at scoring at least 280 to 285, 280 to 300 in your optional. Yes, Rohan, you wanted to ask something.
Yes, sir. Sir, I have got my answer. I was just asking about the management of the notes from the sources.
Okay.
Yes. You have answered someone's question, so I've got my answer. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, all right. Thank you very much for your time and patience. My apologies once again for the delay on my part. I was a little caught up. And good luck with everything. I hope you guys succeed in your plans vis-a-vis UPSC. Thank you very much and stay safe, take good care, stay healthy. All right, bye. इसको बंद कर दो.